I watched the bulldozer tear through my kitchen wall like it was made of paper. 3 years of my life savings. 3 years of planning every detail. 3 years of building my dream home with my own hands. All of it crashing down in a cloud of dust and debris. Corinne Matthews stood at her property line, arms crossed, watching with the satisfaction of someone who had just won a chess game. The HOA president who had made my life a living hell for the past 8 months. The woman who owned the massive racehorse training ranch next door and had decided that my modest home was somehow ruining her perfect view. But as I stood there in the rubble of everything I had worked for, sorting through the scattered papers and broken dreams, I found something that would change everything. Something that would make Corinne Matthews wish she had never heard my name. That is when I realized I held the power to destroy her entire empire. 5 acres of rolling hills stretched out before me as I stood on what would become my front porch. The morning sun painted the countryside in gold, and I could hear nothing but birds singing and the distant sound of horses from the ranch next door. This was it. This was where I would build my dream. I had spent 3 years planning every single detail of this house. Every room, every window, every inch of flooring had been carefully chosen and saved for. I was not a wealthy man, but I was determined. I worked double shifts at the factory, saved every penny, and sacrificed every luxury to make this dream a reality. The property was perfect, far enough from the city to feel peaceful, but close enough for my commute to work. The seller had been honest about the HOA rules, but they seemed reasonable enough. Keep your grass cut. Do not paint your house neon pink, basic stuff that any decent neighbor would follow anyway. My house was modest but beautiful. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and an open kitchen that looked out over the hills. I installed every light fixture myself, laid every tile with my own hands, and painted every wall with pride. It was not a mansion, but it was mine. Every nail, every board, every drop of sweat that went into building it was mine. The problem started about 2 months after I moved in. Corinne Matthews introduced herself on a Tuesday morning as I was watering my small garden. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She smiled as she walked up my driveway, but her eyes were cold as they scanned my property. Behind her, I could see her sprawling ranch stretching across hundreds of acres. Pristine white fences, professional landscaping, and barns that looked bigger than most people's homes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, though her tone suggested I was anything but welcome. "I am Corinne Matthews, president of the Hillside Meadows HOA. I hope you are settling in well." I thanked her for stopping by and mentioned how much I loved the peaceful setting. That is when her smile disappeared completely. "About that," she said, pointing toward my front fence. "I noticed your fence height might be a concern. HOA guidelines specify 36 inches maximum for front yard fencing. Yours appears to be 38 inches. I looked at my fence. It was a simple wooden fence that I had installed myself, matching the style of several other properties in the area. 2 inches seemed like a pretty small thing to worry about, but I told her I would look into it. "Also," she continued, "your mailbox placement needs to be reviewed. All mailboxes must be exactly 12 feet from the road center line. Yours looks closer to 14 feet. That night, I pulled out my HOA paperwork and read every single page. The fence height rule was there, buried in Section 12 of a 40-page document. The mailbox rule was in Section 18. Both violations carried $50 fines. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Corinne driving by my house more frequently. Sometimes she would slow down and take pictures with her phone. Sometimes she would stop and measure things with a tape measure she kept in her car. I decided to do some research of my own. I drove around the neighborhood and discovered something interesting. Several other properties had fences higher than 36 inches. 3 mailboxes were clearly further from the road than mine. One house had a bright purple front door that seemed to violate the earth tone colors only rule I had read about. None of those properties had received violation notices, only mine. I called the HOA office and asked to speak with other board members. That is when I learned that Karen had been president for 12 years and controlled the board completely. The other members were either her friends or too intimidated to challenge her decisions. As I stood on my porch that evening, looking out over the beautiful countryside that had drawn me here, I realized I was not dealing with reasonable HOA enforcement. I was dealing with someone who had decided I did not belong in her neighborhood. And she was just getting started. The violation notices started arriving daily. My mailbox was stuffed with official HOA correspondence, each one more ridiculous than the last. First came the fence and mailbox violations I expected. Then came a notice about my outdoor furniture placement. Patio furniture must be arranged in a manner consistent with neighborhood aesthetics, the notice read. Current arrangement creates visual discord and diminishes property values. I had 2 plastic chairs and a small table on my back porch. They were not even visible from the street. Next came a complaint about my landscaping. According to Karen, my flower beds were inconsistent with established neighborhood standards and created an unkempt appearance. I had planted native wildflowers that the local nursery had recommended. They were beautiful and attracted butterflies and bees. But Karen wanted them gone. The most insulting notice came on a Friday, a $50 fine for having the wrong color front door. My door was forest green, which I thought looked perfect with my house. According to the violation notice, only approved earth tones were acceptable, and forest green was not on the list. I checked the official color chart attached to the notice. Beige, tan, brown, and gray were approved. Forest green was not listed, but neither were dozens of other colors I could see on houses throughout the neighborhood. That weekend, I took photos of every house in our HOA area. I documented purple doors, blue doors, red doors, and even one bright yellow door. I noted fence heights, mailbox placements, and landscaping choices. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen was selectively enforcing rules that she ignored for everyone else. On Monday morning, I found Karen in my front yard with a measuring tape. She was documenting the exact height of my fence posts and taking photos from multiple angles. When she saw me, she did not even have the decency to look embarrassed. "Just doing my job," she said with a cold smile, "ensuring all residents comply with community standards." "What about the blue door on Maple Street?" I asked. "Or the 40-inch fence on Oak Avenue?" Her smile disappeared. "Those properties are being reviewed through proper channels. Your violations are immediate and obvious." That evening, I received a call from my neighbor across the street. Mrs. Henderson was an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. She had watched Karen measure my fence from her kitchen window. "That woman has been after your property since the day you started building," she told me in a whisper. "She tried to buy your land before you did, but the seller would not take her offer. She told everyone at the last HOA meeting that your house was bringing down property values." Mrs. Henderson explained that Karen had been expanding her ranch operation for years. She had bought 3 properties in the past decade, always after making life miserable for the previous owners, through HOA violations and harassment. She wants your land for her horses, Mrs. Henderson said. That is why she is doing this to you. The HOA meeting was held the third Thursday of every month in the community center. I had never attended one before, but after 6 weeks of daily violation notices, I decided it was time to face Corinne publicly. The community center was barely half full. Corinne sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all of them looking like they would rather be anywhere else. She wore a professional business suit and had a stack of papers in front of her that I recognized as my violation notices. When the time came for new business, Corinne stood up and smiled at the small crowd. "We have been dealing with some compliance issues lately," she announced, looking directly at me. "Some residents seem to think that HOA rules are suggestions rather than requirements." She proceeded to read through every violation notice she had sent me, describing each one in detail to the room. My fence height, my mailbox placement, my furniture arrangement, my landscaping choices, and my door color. She made it sound like I had deliberately set out to destroy the neighborhood. "These violations represent a clear disregard for community standards," she concluded. "If we allow this behavior to continue, we risk a significant decline in all property values." When she finished, she asked if I had any response. I stood up with my folder of photos, documenting identical violations throughout the neighborhood that she had ignored. I explained that I had tried to comply with reasonable requests, but that the enforcement seemed targeted and unfair. Corinne listened with a patronizing smile, then responded with words that still echo in my memory. "Mr. Johnson, if you find our community standards too demanding, perhaps you should consider whether this neighborhood is the right fit for you. We have maintained our property values and quality of life for many years. We will not allow one resident to undermine that success." The room was silent. Several neighbors avoided eye contact. Mrs. Henderson looked at me with sympathy but said nothing. As I walked to my car that night, Corinne caught up with me in the parking lot. "You seem like a smart man," she said quietly. "Smart enough to recognize when you are fighting a battle you cannot win. I have connections with the city building department, the county assessor, and the state environmental agency. This can get much more difficult for you if you choose to be stubborn." Her threat was clear: back down or face consequences beyond HOA violations. I should have listened to that warning. By the end of my 3rd month in the house, I had accumulated over $2,000 in HOA fines. Corinne had found violations I never knew existed. My garden hose was stored improperly. My trash cans were visible from the street for 6 minutes longer than the allowed time on pickup day. My car was parked at the wrong angle in my own driveway. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a threat of legal action if not corrected immediately. I finally called a lawyer. David Chen was a young attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was small, but his reputation was solid. When I showed him my stack of violation notices, he whistled softly. "This is harassment," he said after reviewing the documents. "Clear and obvious selective enforcement. We can fight this." David filed a formal complaint challenging the fines and requesting a review of HOA enforcement practices. The response came faster than I expected. Corinne had hired the most expensive law firm in the county to represent the HOA. "She is using association funds to pay for legal counsel," David explained during our second meeting. "That means she can afford to drag this out as long as she wants. Your legal costs come out of your pocket. Hers come out of the community budget." The discovery process revealed something that made my blood boil. Karen had been manipulating HOA rules for years, adding new restrictions and enforcement policies without proper board votes or community input. She had been targeting specific homeowners who owned properties she wanted to acquire. "Look at this," David said, showing me internal HOA emails that had been subpoenaed. "She has been planning to expand her ranch operation for 5 years. Your property is specifically mentioned as a target acquisition." The emails were damning. Karen had written to other board members about encouraging voluntary relocations and maintaining property standards that support our community vision. My property was mentioned by address in several emails, with comments about incompatible land use and expansion opportunities. But knowing the truth and proving it in court were two different things. Karen had been careful to document every violation with photos and measurements. Her selective enforcement was obvious to anyone paying attention, but legally challenging it required proving discriminatory intent. The legal costs mounted quickly. David was worth every penny, but hourly legal fees add up fast when fighting someone with unlimited resources. By month 4, I had spent over $8,000 on attorney fees and court costs. That is when Karen escalated beyond HOA violations. I came home from work one Tuesday to find a city building inspector parked in my driveway. He introduced himself as Robert Walsh and explained that the city had received complaints about potential structural violations in my home. "What kind of structural violations?" I asked, genuinely confused. He showed me a formal complaint filed by the HOA. It claimed that my foundation was improperly installed, that my electrical work did not meet code requirements, and that my plumbing system posed environmental hazards. Every single claim was false. I had permits for all the work, inspections had been completed and approved, and everything had been done to code. But that did not matter. The complaint had been filed and the city was required to investigate. "I need to do a full inspection," Walsh explained. "If violations are found, you will have 30 days to correct them or face potential condemnation." My lawyer was furious when I called him. "This is exactly what she threatened," David said. "She is using her connections to attack you through multiple agencies." The inspection took 6 hours. Walsh went through every room, every closet, every inch of plumbing and electrical work. He measured everything twice and took hundreds of photos. When he finished, he looked puzzled. "I do not see any violations," he admitted. "Your work looks professional and everything appears to be up to code." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I received a notice from the city building department. Despite Walsh's inspection finding no violations, the complaint remained open pending additional review by specialized inspectors. David did some research and discovered something that made my stomach drop. Robert Walsh had recently been reassigned. The new inspector reviewing my case was Michael Torres, whose construction company had done extensive work on Karen's ranch over the past 3 years. "This is corruption," David said bluntly, "but proving it is going to be difficult and expensive. She has been building this network of connections for years." That night, I sat in my dream home and calculated the costs. Legal fees, inspection fees, potential remediation costs if they manufactured violations, and the ongoing HOA fines that continued to accumulate daily. I was fighting a war I could not afford against an enemy who had unlimited resources and a network of allies in positions of power. But I was not ready to surrender, not yet. The notice arrived on a Friday morning in a certified mail envelope that required my signature. Official letterhead from the city building department, signed by Michael Torres, the inspector with financial ties to Corinne's ranch. Notice of structural violations and demolition order. The header read in bold red letters. My hands shook as I read the details. According to Torres, his specialized inspection had revealed critical foundation problems, electrical hazards, and plumbing violations that posed immediate risks to public safety and environmental integrity. I had 30 days to demolish my home, or the city would do it for me and bill me for the costs. I called David immediately. His secretary put me through even though it was barely 7 in the morning. "This is impossible," he said after I read him the notice. "I was there for Walsh's inspection. There were no violations found. None." David requested copies of Torres' inspection report and photos. What we received was a fabrication so obvious it would have been laughable if it were not destroying my life. Photos of foundation cracks that did not exist in my house. Electrical violations in rooms that Torres had never entered. Plumbing problems in systems that had been professionally installed and city approved just months earlier. "He is using photos from other properties," David concluded after comparing the images to photos of my actual house. "This is fraud, plain and simple." We filed an emergency appeal requesting a hearing before the City Planning Commission. Our request was denied. We requested an independent inspection by a neutral third party. Denied. We asked for a delay to prepare our defense. Denied. Every avenue of appeal led back to the same network of officials who were either connected to Corinne or intimidated by her influence. I spent my life savings on expert witnesses. A structural engineer who confirmed my foundation was solid. An electrician who verified all my electrical work met or exceeded code requirements. A plumber who documented that my systems posed no environmental risks. None of it mattered. "The system is rigged," David admitted during what would be our final meeting. "I have never seen corruption this blatant, but she has been building these relationships for years. Every official who could help you is either on her payroll or afraid of her political connections." On day 28, I made one last desperate attempt. I drove to the state capitol and met with representatives from the Attorney General's office. I brought everything: the discriminatory HOA enforcement, the manufactured building violations, the financial connections between inspectors and Corinne's ranch, the fraudulent inspection photos. The Assistant Attorney General listened politely and promised to look into the matter. But looking into corruption takes time, and I only had 2 days left. On day 30, I stood in my front yard at 6 in the morning, watching 3 bulldozers lumber up my driveway. Behind them came a crew of workers, a dumpster truck, and a supervisor who avoided eye contact as he handed me the final demolition notice. "You have 1 hour to remove any personal belongings," he said. "After that, we start demo." I walked through my house one last time. Every room held memories of the 3 years I had spent building this dream. The kitchen, where I had installed custom cabinets with my own hands. The bedroom, where I had laid hardwood flooring piece by piece. The bathroom, where I had tiled the shower during weekend after weekend of careful work. All of it about to become rubble. I loaded what I could into my truck: photo albums, important documents, a few pieces of furniture that held sentimental value. Most of my belongings would be buried under tons of debris within hours. At exactly 7 a.m., the first bulldozer fired up its engine. The operator looked apologetic as he positioned the massive machine next to my front wall. He knew this was wrong. They all knew this was wrong. but they had their orders and their paychecks depended on following them. The blade hit my kitchen wall with a sound I will never forget. 3 years of my life crumbled in seconds. The custom cabinets I had installed exploded into splinters. The tile backsplash I had carefully laid shattered into fragments. The breakfast nook where I had imagined drinking coffee for decades disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris. I stood frozen, watching my dreams die piece by piece. The sound was deafening. Crashing, grinding, crushing. The bulldozer methodically tore through every room, reducing my home to a pile of broken wood, twisted metal, and shattered glass. That is when I saw her. Corinne Matthews stood at the edge of her property, arms crossed, watching the destruction with obvious satisfaction. She had positioned herself perfectly to observe every moment of my defeat. When our eyes met across the wreckage, she smiled. Not a polite smile or even a vindictive smile. A smile of pure triumph. The smile of someone who had won a game that only she knew she was playing. 4 hours later, my dream home was gone. 37 years of my life reduced to a pile of rubble that would be hauled away by evening. 3 years of planning, building, and hopping erased in a single morning. I sat in my truck in what used to be my driveway, surrounded by the debris of everything I had worked for. My savings were gone. My home was gone. My faith in justice was gone. But as I started to drive away, something caught my eye in the passenger seat. A manila folder that had fallen out of one of my document boxes during the frantic packing. Property deeds, insurance papers, and other documents I had grabbed without thinking. I almost threw it away. What did property documents matter when the property no longer existed? Instead, I opened the folder one last time. That decision would change everything. The motel room was small and depressing, but it was all I could afford after the legal fees and demolition costs. I had been living there for 2 weeks, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. My job at the factory felt meaningless now. My coworkers offered sympathy, but what could they say? A corrupt system had destroyed an innocent man, and everyone knew it. I spent most evenings sorting through the documents I had saved from my house. Insurance papers that would never pay out because the demolition was legally authorized. Building permits that had meant nothing when politics trumped law. Bank statements showing the slow drain of my life savings into legal fees and futile appeals. That is when I found the folder I had almost thrown away. Mixed in with my property deed and survey maps was a document I had never paid attention to before. Water rights documentation, yellowed with age and covered in legal language I barely understood. The previous owner had mentioned water rights when I bought the property, but I had assumed it was just about well water for my house. I was wrong. I spread the documents across the motel room desk and started reading carefully. According to the papers, my property held senior water rights to the Clearwater Aquifer, the underground water source that supplied the entire Hillside Meadows area. The rights were dated 1923, making them among the oldest in the county. But it was the scope of the rights that made my heart race. These were not just rights to household water usage. These were agricultural and commercial water rights, allowing unlimited extraction for farming, livestock, and business operations. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and requested every document related to water rights in our area. The clerk, an elderly woman named Betty, was happy to help someone who seemed genuinely interested in local history. Water rights are serious business around here, she explained as she pulled files from storage. Especially during drought years, senior rights trump everything else. The files she brought me painted a clear picture. The Clearwater Aquifer supplied water to dozens of properties in the area, but the rights were distributed based on historical priority. Properties with older rights had first claim to the water. Newer properties, like most of the homes in the HOA area, had junior rights that were subject to senior claims. Corinne's ranch, despite its size and apparent wealth, had water rights dated 1987. My property's rights predated hers by over 60 years. I requested a detailed map showing the aquifer boundaries and extraction points. What I discovered made me dizzy with possibilities. The entire Clearwater Aquifer was supplied by underground springs that originated directly beneath my former property. Every well in the area, including the massive irrigation system that kept Corinne's ranch operational, drew water that technically belonged to me. But the most important discovery was yet to come. I called the County Water Authority and requested usage records for all properties drawing from the Clearwater Aquifer. It took 3 days and a small fee, but they provided detailed consumption data for the past 5 years. Corinne's ranch was using over 3 times the amount allowed by her water rights permit. I spread the usage reports across my motel room bed and calculated the numbers 3 different times. Her legal water allocation was 150,000 gallons per month for agricultural use. Her actual usage averaged over 500,000 gallons per month. She had been stealing water for years, and nobody had noticed because the aquifer seemed abundant. But senior water rights are not about abundance. They are about legal priority, and my rights gave me the authority to control every drop of water flowing through that aquifer. I called David Chen, my former lawyer. Despite everything that had happened, he agreed to meet with me to review the water rights documents. "This is incredible," he said after studying the papers for an hour. "These rights are ironclad. They predate every other water claim in the area by decades." "Can I actually cut off her water supply?" I asked. David smiled for the first time since I had known him. "Not only can you cut off her water supply, you can demand compensation for every gallon she has used illegally over the past 5 years. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in theft." "What about her political connections? Can they override water rights?" "Water rights are federal law," David explained. "Senior rights are protected by constitutional principles that go back to the founding of the Western states. No local political connection can override established water rights. She would need to change federal law to escape this." That night, I sat in my depressing motel room and felt something I had not experienced in months: hope. Corinne Matthews had destroyed my home using her network of corrupt officials and political connections. She had manipulated the system to crush me because I was just one man fighting against her empire. But she had made one critical mistake. She had attacked someone who controlled the one thing her empire could not survive without: water. I spent the next week researching everything about Corinne's ranch operation. Her training facilities, her boarding services, her breeding programs. All of it depended completely on massive amounts of water for drinking, irrigation, cleaning, and maintaining the pristine conditions that attracted wealthy clients. Without water, her horses would die. Without water, her grass would turn brown. Without water, her clients would leave. Without water, her empire would crumble. And I controlled every drop. The student was about to become the teacher. The victim was about to become the victor. Corinne Matthews was about to learn what it felt like to have your entire world destroyed by someone with the legal authority to do it. I filed the water rights enforcement paperwork on a Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m. David Chen had prepared everything perfectly. A formal notice to cease unauthorized water extraction, documentation of 5 years of illegal usage, and a demand for immediate compliance with established water rights priority. The notice was served to Corinne Matthews personally at her ranch office by a county sheriff deputy. According to the deputy, she barely glanced at the papers before tossing them on her desk. "Just more legal nonsense from that troublemaker," she reportedly said. "My lawyers will handle it." She had no idea what was coming. The County Water Authority responded within 48 hours. As the holder of senior water rights, I had the legal authority to regulate all water extraction from the Clearwater aquifer. They would install flow control devices within 1 week to ensure compliance with established water rights priorities. That is when Corinne's lawyers called. "This is harassment," her attorney declared during a conference call with David and me. "My client has been operating her ranch for decades with proper permits and approvals." David calmly read the water rights documentation aloud, explaining the legal hierarchy of water claims and the priority system established by federal law. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "We will need to review these documents," the lawyer finally said. His confident tone had disappeared completely. The flow control equipment was installed on Thursday. Large metal valves and monitoring devices were placed at key points throughout the aquifer system. I now had the ability to control exactly how much water flowed to every property in the area, including Corinne's ranch. I started with a 50% reduction. The effects were immediate and devastating. Corinne's irrigation system, designed to maintain perfect grass conditions for her horse training facilities, began showing brown patches within days. Her automatic watering systems for the horse stalls started running dry during peak usage hours. By the second week, her horses were showing signs of stress. The pristine conditions that attracted wealthy clients began deteriorating rapidly. The ranch that had looked like a picture-perfect postcard for years started looking ordinary and neglected. Corinne's phone calls began on day 10. "What do you want?" she asked when I answered. Her voice was different now, less commanding, more desperate. "I want you to comply with water rights law," I replied calmly. "Stop stealing water that belongs to me." "I will pay you," she said. "Name your price. $100,000 for unlimited water access." I almost laughed. A month earlier, she had watched my home being demolished with satisfaction. Now she was offering me money like we were old friends negotiating a business deal. "200,000, she said when I did not respond. "Cash payment, no questions asked." "The water is not for sale," I told her. "It never was. You have been stealing it for years." I hung up. 3 days later, Corinne tried to use her political connections. The county commissioner called me personally to discuss finding a reasonable solution to the water dispute. "Mrs. Matthews provides significant economic value to our community," he explained. "Her ranch employs dozens of people and attracts visitors from across the state. Surely we can reach some accommodation." I let him talk for 10 minutes before responding. "Commissioner, are you asking me to ignore federal water rights law to benefit someone who illegally destroyed my home?" The line went quiet. "I did not say that," he replied carefully. "Then what are you saying?" Another long pause. "I am saying that compromise benefits everyone involved. The only compromise I am interested in is Corinne Matthews complying with the law," I said. "The same law she demanded I comply with when she was destroying my life." I hung up on him too. By week 3, Corinne's ranch operation was in crisis. Two of her biggest clients had moved their horses to facilities with more reliable water supplies. Her grass was dying in large brown patches that were visible from the road. Her staff was struggling to maintain basic operations with reduced water pressure. I drove by her ranch every few days to document the deterioration. It was remarkable how quickly perfection turned to decay when the fundamental resources were removed. Her empire, built on unlimited access to stolen water, crumbled as fast as my house had been demolished. The horses were my biggest concern. I am not a cruel person, and I did not want innocent animals to suffer because of their owner's corruption. I maintained enough water flow to ensure the horses had drinking water and basic needs, but I cut off everything else. Corinne's desperation reached new levels in week 4. $500,000, she offered during her third phone call that week. Plus, I will resign from the HOA board and publicly apologize for what happened to your house. It was tempting. $500,000 was more money than I had ever imagined having. It would let me rebuild my life, buy a new property, start over somewhere else. But it would also let Corinne escape the consequences of her actions. Not interested, I told her. $1 million, she said immediately. $1 million cash, and I will pay for you to build a new house anywhere you want. The offer was staggering, life-changing money, but I had learned something important during the months of fighting her corruption. Some things matter more than money. Justice matters more than money. The water stays off, I said, until you face the same consequences you forced on me. You are destroying everything I have worked for, she said, and for the first time I heard real fear in her voice. Now you know how it feels, I replied, and hung up for the final time. By the end of month 1, Corinne's racehorse training empire was collapsing. Her clients were gone, her grass was dead, and her political connections were distancing themselves from her legal problems. The water war was over. I had won. The federal investigation began in month 2 of the water cutoff. When Corinne's illegal water usage became public record through my legal filings, it triggered automatic reviews by multiple agencies. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Land Management all opened investigations into unauthorized water extraction from the Clearwater Aquifer. Corinne's lawyers tried every legal maneuver possible, but federal water rights law is absolute. Her political connections meant nothing when facing federal agencies investigating environmental crimes. The charges were devastating. 5 years of illegal water extraction, environmental damage to protected wetlands downstream, and falsification of usage reports to county authorities. Each violation carried significant fines and potential criminal penalties. Her racehorse training business collapsed completely. Without adequate water for operations, her remaining clients moved their horses to other facilities. The perfect grass fields that had been her pride turned brown and died. The pristine ranch that had intimidated me with its wealth and power became a monument to the consequences of corruption. In month 3, Corinne was forced to sell the eastern section of her ranch to pay legal fees and environmental fines. The irony was perfect. She had destroyed my home to expand her operation, and now she was losing parts of her own property to pay for her crimes. The corrupt building inspectors faced their own reckoning. The state licensing board investigated Michael Torres and discovered a pattern of fraudulent inspections connected to personal financial relationships. His inspector license was revoked, and criminal charges were filed for official misconduct. Robert Walsh, The honest inspector who had found no violations in my home was promoted to head of the building inspection department. His first official act was to publish new policies preventing conflicts of interest in the inspection process. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president after her legal troubles became public. The new board president was Mrs. Henderson, my elderly neighbor who had tried to warn me about Karen's tactics. Her first act was to rescind all the discriminatory fines and violations that Karen had imposed on me and other targeted homeowners. David Chen negotiated a settlement that exceeded my wildest expectations. Karen agreed to pay full compensation for my destroyed home, including construction costs, legal fees, and damages for emotional distress. The total settlement was $1.2 million. But the money was not the real victory. The real victory was watching a corrupt system face consequences for its actions. Karen's network of political allies distanced themselves from her legal troubles. The officials who had enabled her corruption faced investigations and scrutiny. The system that had seemed so powerful and untouchable crumbled when confronted with federal law and public attention. I used the settlement money to buy a beautiful property in the mountains, far from HOA rules and corrupt officials. My new home is larger and better than the one Karen destroyed, with senior water rights that nobody can challenge. Karen's ranch empire, once spanning hundreds of acres, is now reduced to a small fraction of its former size. She lives quietly on the remaining property, her political power broken, her reputation destroyed, her illegal water supply permanently cut off. Sometimes I drive past the ruins of her former empire and remember the day she stood at her property line, watching my dreams being demolished with satisfaction. Justice served cold taste sweeter than any revenge. The water stays off,